Kensington in West London contains many spacious, tree-lined streets built in the latter half of the 19th century. This is Addison Road, in the area known as Holland Park. It's still a leafy and attractive suburb, with streets lined with typical well-to-do mid-Victorian houses. Their status is admirably expressed by the showy stucco front over the simple stock brick shell. In the midst of this conventional affluence, there sprang up a new style of architecture. These red brick houses aren't really part of the common run of suburban development. That's because most of the building plots in this road were taken by the group of artists who made this area the centre of a new aesthetic elite. Their homes used new materials and fostered new styles as part of the establishment of a new taste. And they demonstrate the developing status of the artist in high Victorian Britain. Part of the attraction of this area in the first place was that there already was, centred on Holland House, an aristocratic and intellectual circle. Holland House had been the ancestral home of the third Lord Holland, one of the leading Whig politicians that dominated Parliament in the early years of the century. The third and fourth Lords Holland and their wives maintained the house as a place where most of the political and intellectual leaders of the day, as well as members of the royal family, were lavishly entertained. The fourth Lord Holland also acted as a patron of the arts. He more or less adopted an unknown British artist whom he met in Italy in 1843. This was George Frederick Watts. The son of a piano tuner, Watts was a largely self-taught painter who came to live at Little Holland House, where he became a sort of resident attraction at the intellectual salons of Mrs. Toby Princeps, a society hostess who had rented the old dower house from the Hollands. The Hollands' extravagant lifestyle had forced them not only to let Little Holland House, but also to engage in extensive development of their estate in an attempt to increase their income. By the 1850s, the whole of the western edge of the park had been laid out as a suburb, with Addison Road as its main thoroughfare. Groups of smart new houses were built. These so-called cottages were completed as early as 1845. They're conventional three-bedroomed houses in London stock brick, not large, but eminently respectable. 5 years later, this terrace of larger, more showy villas was run up next door. They would be for families with a couple of living-in servants. Set back from the road, they are tricked out with a veneer of Tudor Gothic stucco. It's all fairly typical of middle-class, mid-Victorian suburbia. However, in the 1860s, development spread to the southern corner of Holland Park, where the first of the artists' houses was built in Holland Park Road for Valentine Cameron Princeps, whose parents were renting Little Holland House. Val Princeps' development as a painter was influenced by his parents' lodger, G.F. Watts, as well as by the Pre-Raphaelites, who were the leading modern painters in the 1850s. This painting, The Queen Was in Her Parlour, shows the contemporary taste for the medieval fantasy world of nursery rhymes. In 1879, Princeps was commissioned to paint this, the Delhi Durbar, a major state occasion when the Indian princes gathered to hear Queen Victoria proclaimed Empress of India. The status such a commission conferred on the artist indicates the place Princeps held in the social and artistic hierarchy. Val Princeps' house has been much altered. but it was originally designed by Philip Webb, who'd just completed building the Red House at Bexley Heath for Prinsep's friend William Morris. Next door to Prinsep's house, there was built at the same time another, for the man who was to become the most prominent figure in this social and artistic circle, Frederick Leighton. His house was designed especially to his needs by his friend George Aitchison. The north side is dominated by the great window of the first-floor studio, demonstrating its use as a workplace as well as a private dwelling. The north-facing window gives an even light without hard shadows, essential for a professional painter. But this was always more than a painting room. It became the scene of Leighton's famous musical evenings, society gatherings held at the time of the Royal Academy exhibition. And Leighton filled it with fine art objects, among them casts of Michelangelo's Tondo and the Parthenon frieze. These indicate his taste for high art and for classicism. Significantly, you can just discern the frieze as the background he chose for this self-portrait. As a painter, Leighton is best known for his sumptuously elegant scenes from classical mythology, such as this image of a festival called the Daphne Foria. The style of painting revealed his continental training, and it became the new taste in the last quarter of the century, very different from the pre-Raphaelite works, like the Hireling Shepherd, that had been the new taste in the 1850s. Leighton was a friend of Holman Hunt, Millet, and Rossetti, but preferred a more sumptuous style, as in The Noble Lady of Venice, which he painted in 1865, and which was later sold to Lord Armstrong for his collection at Cragside. The sums of money Leighton could command for his pictures in 1865 are indicated by his confidence in starting to build his house in that year, the first stage of which cost 6 times the price of the average house in nearby Addison Road. At one end of this grand studio is a narrow, hidden doorway, a separate entrance for the artist's models, revealing that in this Victorian studio they belonged to the servants' class. The young Connie Gilchrist, who appears here as all of Daphne's attendant nymphs, was one of Leighton's favourite models, till at the age of 13 she began a career as a music hall dancer. Dorothy Dean, another favourite, here painted as Bianca, later became an actress, after Leighton had paid for her to have elocution lessons. In 1878, Leighton was elected President of the Royal Academy, and remained for the next 15 years a distinguished arbiter of taste. His house was already the focus of the new social and artistic set. The studio was the chief room on the first floor. In 1877, there was only one other, Leighton's bedroom. Still, the first floor is approached by a sumptuous stairway, a feature that's common to most of the artists' houses in Melbury Road. The space is clearly designed more for elegance than use, and is intended to provide a proper setting for the distinguished artist and his visitors. The exotic decor was all part of the new aesthetic, which had helped establish Leighton's reputation. His prominent position in the art world attracted other artists to live in the same area. Immediately beyond his garden fence, this house was built for Marcus Stone. To the south, it has the appearance of a solid family home, but its north side is again dominated by large studio windows overlooking the newly built Melbury Road, In fact, the whole of the first floor is given over to the studio. Marcus Stone was a typical professional artist. He'd begun as an illustrator. His paintings were generally sentimental narrative scenes, such as this one, There Is Always Another. And there's no doubt that as a painter he was financially successful. He was able to commission the architect, Richard Norman Shaw, to design his house in the newly fashionable Queen Anne style, with delicate rubbed brickwork and white-painted wood. The house next door has been demolished and replaced by something more typical of Kensington in the mid-20th century. The site had been taken by G.F. Watts when Melbury Road was first developed and Little Holland House pulled down. He built this rambling mansion with 2 studios and a picture gallery. Watts had come to be revered as almost the founding father of this artists' colony. He'd become established as one of the most eminent and respected painters of his day. His many portraits included those of Cardinal Manning and John Stuart Mill, as well as fellow artists like William Morris and the newly knighted Sir Frederick Leighton. The sculptor Hamo Thornycroft moved into Melbury Road at the same time, designing this house for himself. He made it picturesque, with a variety of gables and tall chimneys. It was, in fact, built as a pair of semi-detached mansions, with one half taken by Mr. and Mrs. Russell Barrington. She was an amateur painter, as well as the biographer of both Watts and Leighton. Thornycroft's half accommodated his whole family, including his parents. Both of them were established sculptors who'd already enjoyed royal patronage. In fact, Thomas Thornycroft had contributed the group Commerce to the Albert Memorial, using his son, Hamo, as a model for the figure of the young merchant. Hamo himself developed a different style that became known as the New Sculpture, in which he concentrated more on the subtlety of texture and delicacy of form. One of his first works to show this style was Warrior and Wounded Youth, with which he won the Royal Academy Gold Medal in 1875, the year before he moved into Melbury Road. His success later earned him many public commissions, including this memorial in Trinity College, Cambridge. At the other end of Melbury Road, from Hamo Thornycroft's house, is this handsome and spacious mansion, built for another young artist, Luke Files. He paid over the odds for this prime corner site, investing even more than Leighton had 10 years before in building on it. And his was the second house in this artist's colony to be designed by Norman Shaw. Certain details still display Luke Files' sense of self-confidence. For when he began building, he was not even an associate of the Royal Academy. The north side, like the other houses designed specifically for painters, is dominated by its studio windows. Files' career had begun conventionally, illustrating Dickens' last novel, Edwin Drood. Subsequently, an illustration for the graphic became a successful Academy picture, Applicants Awaiting Admission to a Casual Ward, an affecting image of supposedly real life. By 1882, Files was so successful that he was able to sell this painting, The Village Wedding, direct from his studio before it had even been exhibited, and for half the price he'd paid for his house. 700 visitors called to see it on sending-in day, and at the peak of his profession, Files expected 1,000 callers. But then Files was one of the new generation that in the Edwardian era was to be recognised as the established elite. Although Fildes had spent over the odds building his house, the one next door was probably the most expensive of those built in Melbury Road. This is Tower House, designed by the architect William Burgess for himself, but in a totally different idiom. Burgess was a long-standing friend of both Leighton, Watts and Holman Hunt. In the 1850s, he'd belonged with them to the Hogarth Club, a loose grouping of opponents of the Royal Academy. But in 1875, Burgess bought a plot in Melbury Road and designed his own private palace of art, which shows all his earlier ideals, true to the Gothic style that had been the leading taste back in the 1860s. Every part of his house was replete with medieval imagery. The bronze front door with its emblematic figures leads straight into a double-height hall. This has a richly decorated ceiling, and the plaster walls are painted in imitation stone, like the great hall of some castle of the Middle Ages. Every detail reveals a precise iconography. This identifies the door to the library. And the library itself is fitted up as a complete medieval chamber, devised as a symbolic text. It's typical of Burgess's best work and is dominated by this great carved overmantel on the theme of language. The tower is the Tower of Babel, symbolizing all the languages of the world. In the doorway is the figure of Queen Grammar, sending forth the parts of speech. Significantly, her dress is painted with letters of the three alphabets, Roman, Greek, and Hebrew. The frieze of figures consists of noun, bearing the burden of the sentence, preceded by two articles, the and a, acting as pages to a grand lady representing verb. And at the front of the sentence come the pronouns, blowing their own trumpets. Every detail of what seems to be an imaginary medieval street scene is pressed into the service of the iconography. Even the curve of the dog's tail is supposed to represent the question mark. The literary theme continues beneath, with an alphabet entwined in Gothic foliage. And here, Burgess' taste for the whimsical comes out. The uneducated sculptor seems to have dropped his H. The cabinets, designed to hold this architect's library, are painted with an alphabet of scenes related to building. A is, of course, the architect, William Burgess himself, supervising the building of Tower House. The house was an instant hit in the art world. One client's wife spoke of it as a veritable shrine of brightness, joyousness, and strength. Architecture students who visited it were surprised at its ultra-medievalism and massive construction. Even the heavy boarded ceiling is decorated with figures of scholars, theologians, and lawgivers. The whole house is designed and built to extremely high standards, yet the entire iconography is firmly rooted in the past. Here, the cult of the medieval is elevated to a private milieu, where Burgess and his friends might sup from crystal goblets and jewelled plates, surrounded by noble characters of myth and fantasy. The function of this dining room dictates different materials. The smooth marble and tiles of the walls are washable. So also is the painted zodiacal ceiling. This is made of sheets of enamelled iron, almost the only really modern material used, but still decorated to fit with the medieval style of the house. The tiled frieze illustrates a fabled world that includes, amongst others, Robinson Crusoe and Man Friday, the Fairy Queen, and Sleeping Beauty, as well as St. George and the Dragon. It's a very English world, in contrast to the one created by Frederick Leighton when he built this splendid extension to his house in 1878. Designed to display his collection of Oriental tiles, the whole composition creates a fantastic space that transforms this corner of well-to-do suburbia into a version of Araby. The room was another creation of Leighton's friend, George Aitchison, and included several original Islamic items, such as the wooden gallery, or zenana, brought back from Cairo. The collection of tiles was set off by new decorations, such as this mosaic frieze, decorated with motifs fashionable in the new aesthetic movement, and designed especially by Walter Crane. The whole place reveals a very different aspect of cultural consumption and progress of taste from William Morris's campaign of art for all. And the high degree of finish represents a different interest from the rough Gothic that Ruskin described in his push for the restoration of the working craftsman. But Leighton's elegant taste did become the dominant fashion of the day. You can hardly fail to be impressed by this extraordinary, dazzling display. Whether you like it or not seems to me irrelevant. Quite simply, it was the most striking part of the setting created for the leader of that little group of artists who became so firmly established as arbiters of taste. And they were arbiters not only for the relatively small coterie of friends and patrons, but also for the much wider circle of those who aspired to aesthetic acceptability. This taste was for the sumptuous, for the elegant, for a high degree of finish. But it seems to me that it was ultimately rooted in an escapist vision of Oriental exoticism or the classical past. And yet, artists were never held in such high esteem as in the closing decades of the 19th century. Leighton himself was created Baron Stretton just the day before he died. He was the only British artist to have been ennobled. And so the ultimate accolade was bestowed on the taste of this little highbrow circle.